Last time we talked about how to identify the ECI, and we were looking at 1 Samuel chapter 1. So we saw in step 7 that the ECI is closely connected to the TT, that is the theological test, the God, how God is presented, and the HN, the human nature. And often the ECI can be found in a speech by a main character. And we saw that in forming the ECI, which is stated in one sentence, it should be about the characters and it should capture the central idea of the story. And so with 1 Samuel chapter 1, we came up with, it was hard for Hannah to trust God, but he heard her. That was 1. God heard and answered when Hannah came to him with her problem. That was 2. Hannah trusted God with her problem and he answered her. That was 3. And 4, Hannah learned that God answers prayer. Right? And then we selected one of them. Do you remember which one we selected?
B.
B. We selected B, okay? God heard and answered when Hannah came to him with her problem. Okay? Then we went to step 8, and we learned to convert the ECI to a TCI and then to an LCI. TCI stands for?
Theological central idea.
Good. And LCI stands for?
Lesson central idea.
Good. Okay, so the TCI should be true for all believers everywhere. And so instead of writing about the characters, like about Hannah, we need to talk about people everywhere. Words that refer to a specific group, people groups, like believers, or God's people, or unbelievers, things like that. Right? And we asked, what's the timeless principle that is being taught? This is something that goes across all cultures. It's true for all cultures. It's true for all people through all time. Doesn't matter if you lived, 1,000 years ago or whether you live 1,000 years into the future. This is still going to be true. Okay, and then the LCI should use an active verb, first-person pronouns. And so we converted God heard and answered when Hannah came to him with her problems to the TCI, which was God hears and answers when his people come to him with their problems. And then God hears and answers when we come to him with our problems. That would be the LCI. Okay, we made it personal by saying we come to him with our problems. So today we're going to move on to step 9, and then we're going to have an overview of how to put that lesson together, because we've crossed that bridge by going from the ECI to the TCI to the LCI. We've crossed that bridge. So now step 9 is to connect, and then step 10 and following are the lesson, how to prepare the lesson. We're going to get into that today. So with connect, we start connecting these important things. How does your group face situations with the same theological test? Do you remember what we said the theological test was for Hannah? Remember we said that the crisis was that she couldn't have kids, and we're supposed to be thinking about Rachel and how Rachel handled that. And here, Hannah, her theological test is, will she trust God? In other words, will she bring her problem to God or try to solve it on her own? Right? So this is a huge problem, not one that you can solve on your own, for sure. But is she going to try to connive and come up with other ways of handling it, or is she going to turn and ask God? That's the theological test. So, how does your group, the people you'll be teaching, or in the case of you, maybe just thinking about yourself, how do you face situations with the same theological test?
Well, there are things we can't control.
Okay, like what?
If somebody's looking for a job or something.
That could be something like that, okay? Now, in Hannah's case, remember this was a big, big issue, right? And so she brought that before the Lord. You could say a job could be like that. There are other times where we face big crises, big problems in our lives that are out of our control, and we come to God and ask Him for it. You could even say that asking God to heal from cancer or something like that would be a big crisis that we come to God and ask Him for something. Ask Him for healing, right? Okay? So how is the human nature of the story seen in your group or in our lives? What's the human nature?
That humans don't normally take their problems to God.
Right. We normally don't take our problems to God. So how would that be seen in our lives?
We wouldn't take our problems to God.
Right. What are some things that we might come up with that would be different?
Well, if you're trying to get a job, you could maybe bribe people or something.
Okay, maybe bribe people or just work really, really hard getting out your information to different people, but never take it to God in prayer, right? Okay, same thing with the issue with cancer. You could try all these medications, but never take it to God in prayer, or with anything, okay? How does the unchanging nature of God that is seen in the story help us with the human nature of the passage?
He will answer if we do take our problem to Him.
Okay, He answers, right?
Mm-hmm.
He answers.
Even if the answer is no.
Right, even if the answer is no. Now, here's where you can start thinking, okay, are there references in the New Testament that confirm this?
Probably.
Probably. I'm thinking right away of 1 Peter 5:7, casting all your care upon Him because He cares for you, right? As you think about the purpose of the story, let's remember, what was the author's purpose? What did we say his purpose was?
To show the Israelites that they can bring their problems to God.
Right, because God is the one who's in control of all things, as we saw in Hannah's prayer, right? So bring your problems to God. In Hannah's praise there in chapter 2, we see that God is in control of all things. So bring your problems to God, right? So that's His purpose. So as you're thinking about that and thinking, okay, I'm going to prepare a lesson for this, maybe a Sunday school lesson, or for me, maybe a sermon. What would be the purpose of the sermon or lesson?
To show the people you're talking to that they can bring their problems to God.
Right. Okay, so now we've taken the author's purpose and adopted it for our purpose. So you see how we're starting to make sure that our lesson goes along with the passage. Okay? And result. What result did the author want to see?
The Israelites bring their problems to God.
Right, okay? And so as you think about the result, which the writer wanted to see, what will be the result that you will wish to see from your lesson?
That the people you're talking to will bring their problems to God.
Right, okay? So now you're starting to make sure that your story lines up with, your lesson lines up with the story, right? Okay. Now you are ready to prepare your lesson. So let's come back to this picture here. Steps to Old Testament narrative exegesis. On the left, we have our exegesis steps. Let's run over them real quick.
Pray, read before and after, figure out the boundaries, the main characters, arrangement, focusing questions, ECI to TCI to LCI, and connect.
Okay, very good. Now we have crossed the bridge and we're going to start on lesson preparation. Okay? Lesson preparation. So, the first thing you're going to do is present the problem to the people that you're teaching. What's the problem is the human nature problem, okay? What's the human nature problem of this story?
That humans don't normally bring their problems to God.
Right, humans don't normally bring their problems to God. Now, when you present the human nature problem to your group that you're teaching, don't start talking about Hannah or the story yet, okay? You're going to talk about us. How do we normally not bring our problems to God? What sort of situations do we face where we don't bring our problems to God? Talk about that. Maybe use an illustration. Like maybe you can tell a story about someone that you know, and it's better if it's a true story. But tell a story about someone that you know that they faced this really big problem in their life, and what were they going to do about it? And you could leave it hanging like that. What are they going to do about it? And you can talk about some of the different things that we do, but what were they going to do? You can do it like that, or you could say, they didn't pray or take it over to God. You could say, they did this, and they did this, and they did this. You could try doing something like that. But the main idea that you're trying to present is not all the solutions. You're trying to present the problem. Here's the problem that we all face. We come into big problems. What are we going to do with them? Okay? And that is actually the introduction to your lesson. Okay? Now, many books on how to prepare sermons tell you to write your introduction and conclusion last. The way I'm teaching you here, you will actually be writing your introduction first, because your introduction presents the problem that you're going to be talking about through the rest of the lesson. Okay? So it's a little bit different from most books on how to write a sermon. But I found this to be a very effective method. And this is just a template. You can adapt and change, but learn this template first. Okay?
And it makes sense to write the beginning first.
Yes. And there's a reason why they say to write the introduction and conclusion last. That's because they want to make sure that you have the body of your sermon set and ready before you write the introduction to introduce it. Okay? However, with this, the way that I'm presenting it, the introduction is part of the sermon. It's not just something that you do to create interest at the beginning. It does have to create interest, but it starts the connection and it starts the application right from the beginning, because you're getting people to think about these problems that they have in their lives. So it starts the application right from the beginning of the sermon. And that helps people get interested. If you just start talking about Hannah right from the beginning, people go, yeah, I know about Hannah. I know this story. I heard it in Sunday school when I was 3. And they very quickly can tune you out. But if you start with a problem that we all face and present it as this is a problem that we all face, people are ready to listen, because they go, yeah, I recognize that. I know that problem. I understand it. And they're waiting, what's the answer? But you don't tell them the answer in the introduction. Okay? You have to wait till the answer comes out in the story. Then the next step is to present the story. So then you have people turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. After you've presented the introduction, you have people turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1. You could also have people turn to 1 Samuel chapter 1 and then begin step 10, presenting the problem. Either way, when they turn there is not a big deal. I know one man who has a good point. He says, I want them to open their Bible right from the beginning because I want them to know that we are studying God's Word. That's a good, valid point. I like that idea, so I'll often do that. Have people open their Bible right from the beginning because we're studying God's Word. That's a good way to do it. Another way is to do the introduction and then have them open their Bibles. Either way. Okay? So in step 11, you present the story. Now, when you present the story, you're going to go through and explain what's going on. So you'll go over the background and make sure people understand enough about the background to be able to continue. So what sort of background would they need to know with this story?
It's during the time of the judges.
Okay, so you would need to explain what that means. Right? Because most people, if you say during the time of the judges, they're like, okay. But you'd have to explain how that impacts the story, right? Okay. How does that impact the story?
I was hoping you were going to answer that.
Oh.
There's a lot of war and stuff.
A lot of war.
The Israelites aren't following God very well.
Okay.
I don't know what else.
Okay. The temple is at Shiloh. There is no king in Israel, and Judges says every man does what is right in his own eyes. But here you have a man who is faithful to God. But even he's got problems. Right? Or his wife does. So it's a time where every man does what's right in his own eyes. We'll see a little bit later, even the priests, Hophni and Phinehas, are doing what's right in their own eyes. But here's a man who's faithful to God, sacrificing to God, coming up with his family, but his wife has a problem. Okay? So then you go on into the crisis, and you explain the crisis, and you show why the crisis is such a big problem. Right? What's the crisis?
That Hannah can't have kids.
Hannah can't have kids. Why is this a big problem?
Because it could mean that God's cursing her.
It could mean that God's cursing her, but at the very least, God is not blessing her. Right? And especially in that society, not having kids was a big shame for a woman. And so this was very, very shameful for her. On top of that, you had her rival, the other wife, who has kids. And she's constantly provoking and making fun of Hannah, right? So as you present the crisis, you are going to help them see why this is such a big problem for Hannah. And then you're going to present the theological test. What was Hannah's theological test? So in this story, in order to present the theological test, what else do you need to present to them?
The connection between this story and the story of Rachel and Leah and Jacob.
Right. Good. And so that then helps them see Hannah has a decision to make. How is she going to handle this problem? That's the theological test. How will Hannah handle the problem? Will she turn to God? Or will she try to handle it some other way? Then you connect it to people. You connect the story to people by saying, have you ever experienced a problem like that? Maybe talk about some of the problems that we face that are real deep problems. And so you're connecting it back and forth and helping them see how they are similar to Hannah. Now, when they see that their situations are similar to Hannah's situation, it's easier for them to relate to Hannah and easier for them to really understand then how to handle this sort of situation, because you look and see what Hannah did. Okay? Now, we don't just simply look at a story and say, oh, this is what they did, so we should do the same thing. You have to look to see how the story is presenting it. Now, we know that Hannah did a good thing by turning to God. How do we know that?
Because God answered her prayer.
God answered her He blessed her, and all the way through the resolution and conclusion, you see that that point is emphasized, that God answered the thing that she asked of him. Shemuel means
God hears.
God hears, okay? And she, in verse 27, for this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. The thing that I asked him for, God has given to me. That's emphasized throughout the story, that God answered. So you see that this was a good thing that she did. It's not just something we came up off the top of our heads and said, yeah, I think we should do like Hannah. Okay. That's what the story is emphasizing. And so it is proper for us to get people to identify with Hannah and to be able to say, this is what we should be doing. So after we present the story, we then present the answer to the problem. The answer to the problem is the LCI, the lesson central idea. Now, the way that we present it is we first of all show them the ECI of the story. What's the ECI?
The exegetical central idea?
Right, but for this story, what's the ECI? Do you remember what we said there?
No.
Okay, we said God heard and answered when Hannah came to him with her problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so we present that first. As we go through the story, that point comes up automatically, right? At that point, where that point comes up in the story, where we are able to say, see, God heard and answered when Hannah came to him with their problem. That's when we can say, God hears and answers when we come to him with our problems. And there's the LCI, which is the answer to the human nature problem. Human nature problem is?
We don't normally bring our problems to God.
Right. We don't normally want to bring our problems to God. But the answer to that is God hears and answers when we bring our problems to him. So you present the answer, the LCI, and then you apply the LCI. You start saying, okay, what does this look like in our lives? And so once again, you go back to some of the big problems that people face that you brought up either in the introduction or maybe in the as you're helping them connect with Hannah, as you're presenting the story, you've been raising some of the different big problems that we face in our lives that we don't have any control over. And you then say, how do we handle that? Well, we apply this principle. God hears and answers when we bring our problems to him. And then you conclude. Simple. Now, in the conclusion, you don't want to go over all the points again. You also don't want to bring in new information. Okay? You've presented the problem right at the beginning. You present the story, and the story gives us the answer. Because you've been explaining the story gives the answer. Then you present the answer when it comes up there in the story. Then we apply the answer, which is the LCI, and then we conclude. And often a good conclusion is to simply state the LCI one more time. Make that the very last sentence of your lesson. God hears and answers when we bring our problems to him. That's the end. And so people are able to walk away with one main idea, which is?
God hears and answers when we bring our problems to him.
Right. God hears and answers when we bring our problems to him. That seems pretty simple, huh? But do you see how we connected the things that we studied over here on the left side? The crisis, the resolution, conclusion, all in the boundaries. That comes over in when you present the story. So you need to be able to identify those so that when you present the story, you know how the story goes. The main characters, well, you need that as you prepare the lesson. With arrangement, you're going to bring out some of those points that we talked about. For instance, this story makes us think of Jacob and Rachel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Focusing questions, such as the human problem. Well, that's presented right there in the very beginning of our lesson preparation. What is the theological test? Well, we present that in our lesson. What is God like? Well, we present that in our lesson. And then identify the ECI to TCI to LCI. That LCI becomes our main point, our central point for our lesson. So do you see how they fit together? The two sides? You've got to do the left side first before you have anything to say on the right side. And once you have that left side down, once you have the exegetical steps down and you've answered them well, the lesson just kind of puts itself together. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Good. So, for homework, keep working on 1 Samuel chapter 3. Okay? Because we're going to get to that and we're going to go through all the exegetical steps with that, and then we're going to go through the lesson preparation steps with that. 1 Samuel chapter 3.
So I'm not, in my homework, I'm not doing the lesson preparation?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. No. Any questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay. Good.